where we're telling these AIs our hopes, our dreams, our desires, our preferences, and at some point we will give those AIs agency.
Are there any specific KPIs that we can draw out of this to assess whether an AI deployment is actually good for the human well-being and not just efficiency?
I would controversially argue there's no such thing as AI ethics. Really, the difference between AIs and human beings is that human beings have intent. AIs don't have intent yet. And the final question you need to ask yourself is a strange one, which is not what happens if my AI goes wrong. You now need to ask yourself what happens if my AI goes very right. So there is a future where agents become embodied, where you put them in robots, and there's a future where those brains are much more biologically orientated, and there is a future where we might end up accidentally spawning sentient machines that can feel.
How should product teams and policymakers collaborate and actually build cohesive socio-technical systems?
That's a big question. So now I would argue we actually have a duty of care not only to human beings and animals, we now have a duty of care to AIs.
Welcome to the first podcast from the Promethean, a brand new publication that explores where human experience meets machine intelligence. I'm Miya Knights, your host, and I'm excited to dive into the conversations that will shape our future. With over 25 years experience covering the intersection of technology and the enterprise, I've seen how AI is transforming industries and our lives firsthand. But here's the reality. 95% of generative AI pilots fail to deliver returns, and 95% of us use AI tools just for search. This raises important questions about the potential of AI and how we're actually using it. At the Promethean, we're committed to delivering credible reporting, critical insight, and expert commentary on the development, deployment, and implications of AI. The truth is, AI is not just a consumer story, it's also a developer's challenge. As we navigate the complexities of AI, applicability and adoptability will be key. How can we ensure that AI solutions are not only powerful, but also practical and user-friendly? That's why the Promethean is here to serve both the creators and consumers of AI. We'll explore the intricacies of AI, from its potential to drive progress to its challenges and consequences. We'll dive into the stories that will shape our future and examine what it means to build and use AI in a way that's both innovative and responsible. Our mission is to uncover the insights that will help us harness the full potential of AI for everyone. This is why the Promethean is so honoured to welcome Dr. Daniel Hulme to our first podcast. Dr. Hulme is Chief AI Officer at global ad agency WPP, CEO and founder at Satalia, and CEO and co-founder at Consium, as well as entrepreneur in residence at University College London and a global keynote speaker and investor. Daniel is joining me in conversation today to discuss how AI can be engineered and governed to promote human flourishing and social cohesion. Drawing on Daniel's TEDx talks about unifying humanity in the digital age and leveraging AI for growth, we'll explore practical frameworks for aligning enterprise AI with measurable social benefits, policy levers, and sectoral lessons for commerce, industry, and beyond. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Can you just give our audience a quick intro to how you came to be working in AI, how you ended up 18 years at Satalia?
Yeah, I guess when you're interested in questions like what's consciousness, can we build machines that are conscious, what's intelligence, you can't help but sort of get involved in science fiction. And when I was in my teens, very interested in thinking about the impact that these technologies might have on society. I ended up doing a degree in AI at UCL. It was called Computer Science with Cognitive Science. There was two of us in our degree program. I then did a PhD, initially modeling bumblebee brains and then branching out to other types of algorithms, and recognized that there was a real opportunity to apply AI to industry to help solve frictions across supply chains to make things more efficient, more effective. So started Satalia, and Satalia has been solving problems for large organizations for the past 18 years using these technologies. And now have a platform to really think about the big questions that we're facing as a species, and WPP again is extremely supportive of that, and thinking about how do we make sure that we steer humanity towards a positive direction.
Brilliant. When I was watching your talk, TEDx talks, because they're available on YouTube, you argue that AI can be a force for growth and cohesion, which I think you've just spoken to in terms of what captured your imagination with it in the first place. But again, practically, what governance and design choices do you feel organisations, maybe drawing on the experiences of WPP and the clients that you worked for at Satalia, what design and governance choices do you feel are key to turning that potential into measurable social benefit for organisations today?
Yeah, well, I guess the first thing is that every time there's a new technology, and now it's generative AI, and 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it was machine learning. What tends to happen is that we apply these technologies to solving the wrong problems. We blame the technology when it doesn't work, and we say there's a bubble. But the reality is that people are not always very good at understanding how to apply these technologies to solve the right problems. So the first thing to get right, actually, is understanding what these technologies are good at, what they're not good at, and identifying frictions across your supply chain to make sure that we're applying the right technologies, and whether even you have the capability to do that. A lot of people think they can hire AI teams. A lot of people think they can build AI software, but the reality is that it's really, really difficult. And so, one of the opportunities of AI is to be able to apply it to making the creation and dissemination of goods much more energy efficient, much more effective. Essentially creating or gradually moving towards what is called a world of abundance. So, by using these technologies, we can massively reduce the amount of energy required to create and disseminate goods like food, healthcare, energy, transport, and make them more abundant. I would also argue that that companies that are really good at understanding not just about how their products provide value to their customers, whether it be giving access to them to goods that make them happier and more healthy, etc., but companies that have a purpose and a vision, and often most companies' vision and purpose are to make the world a bit better. I think that as we use AI not just as a tool to make things more efficient, but actually use AI as a shopper, personalized buying assistant, those AIs are going to be able to choose goods, to purchase goods, probably much more rationally than we will as human beings. So one of the benefits of potentially using AI as an augmented you is to purchase from companies that align with your values, and also in some respects hold those companies to account to achieving their purpose. So I think actually if we help companies achieve their purpose by buying goods from those companies that are true to their purpose, it's that collective purpose of enterprise that might make the world better for all of us.
Brilliant. Yeah, I love the vision you're painting. I can imagine the audience might be thinking, well, how do I translate my brand purpose into something that is reflected in the algorithm?
So actually, I'm just about to publish an article on how companies need to rethink how we approach creating our values, our purpose in the new age of AI. A lot of organizations, when they come up with their purpose and their values, they choose 5 values. One of them is probably integrity. Another one might be innovation. I actually did an analysis across many companies' different values, and really they just sample from 30 different values that are pretty much homogeneous across most organizations. So actually, I argue that you need to have a clear value proposition with respect to your products. Are your products providing people with access to goods that are cheaper, faster, or are they providing other types of value? Like, does it make you feel nostalgic? Does it make you feel connected? Does it allow you to make the world better? There was a Harvard Business Review paper from 2016 on, it was called the Consumer Values Pyramid. What they did is they identified 30 values that humans value, and mapped it to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what AI is really good at now is understanding what is it that humans value, and it's way beyond faster, better, cheaper. And how do we actually then make sure that we're buying from companies that provide that value? So the first thing is understanding what is the value that my product is providing that customer. And the second is, okay, assuming this company is going to be successful and we're going to grow, what's that company's contribution going to be to society? Patagonia their clothes allow you to be warm and dry, but Patagonia are obviously trying to be as sustainable as possible. So I think there's two things. One is, what do we value as a consumer? And then also, in buying those products and services, are we helping a company achieve their purpose, their vision, which also is an added branding position. So I think that companies need to be a lot more clear about values and also their principles and purpose. What companies need to be really focusing on is understanding how can they apply AI in a way that differentiates their supply chain. And that is often not quick. It's not low-hanging fruit. It's often quite hard, but it's that will make ultimately companies more sustainable.
Yeah, I talk about smarter, faster, cheaper. I see a lot of companies choosing two, which is probably a good idea rather than chasing all three at once, but it's always faster and cheaper, and there's very few, I think, using AI right now to be smarter. So it's really nice to be having this conversation with you about how technology can actually help codify that and actually help businesses run smarter, faster and cheaper. But again, kind of dragging us back down to earth and talking about boring things like key performance indicators. Are there any specific KPIs that we can draw out of this to assess whether an AI deployment is actually good for the human well-being and not just efficiency?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I think we're telling these AIs our hopes, our dreams, our desires, our preferences, and at some point we will give those AIs agency, the ability to make purchasing decisions or recommendations. And those AIs are going to be able to trawl through masses of data. They're going to be able to understand whether those companies really truly are trying to achieve their purpose, or it's just kind of greenwashing or paying lip service. If I say to you, for example, what product do you think about? If I say safe cars, most people might say Volvo. Or if I say, what product do you think about? If I say extreme sports, people might say Red Bull or Oakley. Or if I say Christmas, people might say Coca-Cola. What's happening in their brain is I'm activating neurons. I'm activating safe neuron, which is a value, and also a car. And I'm asking you which product neurons get fired, and you're saying Volvo. And then actually, the role of marketing in some respects is to reinforce those relationships. And so AI is going to help us understand much more about what is that the humans value, how to reinforce those values as a consumer, but it's also going to be a consumer itself and be able to make sure that the companies, the products that it's purchasing really do align to the values of that company, and the company is genuinely moving towards its purpose.
I mean, I totally agree with everything you're saying. I can see that happening. I'm there at the coalface, at the trade end of magazines, looking at retail at the moment, and they're barely coming to terms with the fact that they have to treat us like individuals, much as less. And I think the last sort of 50 years has been pilot high, sell it cheap. They don't really care who they sell it to, but they're soon going to have to I think those that have done best out the last 50 years or so have actually innately followed the instructions you're giving them, because they have a deep-rooted purpose. But there are other organisations there that I think this is going to be an even more challenging prospect for them. So, I mean, how should product teams and policymakers collaborate to avoid fragmentation and actually build cohesive socio-technical systems?
That's a big question, but so like every technology that's had a material impact on people's lives, like automotive and aerospace, pharmaceuticals, that those industries have been heavily regulated, and they've been regulated because things go wrong, and AI will go wrong. I would argue that AI is a little bit like an intoxicated graduate at the moment, and people will deploy intoxicated graduates across their organization, and they'll be surprised why it goes wrong. But it will go wrong, and then I think there'll be much more emphasis on regulation, making sure that we're building tools safely, et cetera, et cetera. So there's definitely a role for government to play there in ensuring that these technologies are safe for society, and we're also preventing bad actors from creating pathogens and all of those challenges. When I did that TEDx talk, which I think you're referring to, which is unifying humanity in a digital age, the question was, if you were to start a planet from scratch, how would you organize it? And I don't think we would organize the planet, how it's currently organized. And back then, now this was many years ago, I thought that there might be some sort of collective objective function we might agree on as a species, like minimizing suffering, minimizing our likelihood of being destroyed by meteorites, and there's some sort of thing that we can all agree on. And over the years, I've realized that actually there probably isn't one objective function that we all agree on. And what I realized is what we need to do is we need to free more people from economic constraints and then allow those people to choose how they want to allocate their time. Interestingly, if you sort of draw a dotted line to how AI might play out, which is bringing the cost of goods down, making them more abundant, education, energy, transport, healthcare. If you can remove the frictions from the creation and dissemination of those goods, you can make them free. So imagine being born into a world where you don't necessarily have access to paid work, but everything you need to survive and thrive as a human is abundant, is free. Now, people say to me, Daniel, what would I do if I didn't have a job? A job defines who I am as a human being. Most people who I know who don't have jobs, they're not sitting at home bored and depressed. Most of them are trying to use their assets, their time, to contribute somehow to humanity. I would actually argue that we all have an innate desire to want to make the world a bit better. Now, unfortunately, most of us are born into economic constraints preventing that. I think the way that we really truly live our humanity is not just living for ourselves, but it's also living for other people. And there's this concept that I got introduced to called a protopia. It's not a utopia. I don't think anybody would agree on what a utopia is. We might agree on what a dystopia is, but a protopia is a system that's incrementally getting better. And for me, what that system looks like is a world where we are making goods more abundant, freeing people from economic constraints because they have access to those goods, allowing them to then use their time to think about how to contribute positively to humanity.
I absolutely love the vision you're painting for us here, Daniel. I agree that AI should be used for the greater good in that regard. But when you talk about a protopia, we still have manufacturing, pharmaceuticals, all of these things that are heavily regulated, automotive, but I don't see that in the last 75, 50 years of technological innovation and digital adoption, we've seen as much regulation. So going back to the original question, what do you think the role of the policymakers are, and what should they be doing to make sure that their role is fit for purpose?
Yeah, it's a great question. How do we deploy these technologies safely in production? And I typically ask myself three questions when deploying AI. The first is the intent appropriate? Is this the right thing to do? And actually, I know there are people out there that have rebranded themselves as AI ethicists. I would controversially argue there's no such thing as AI ethics. Really, the difference between AIs and human beings is that human beings have intent. AIs don't have intent yet. And it's the intent that needs to get scrutinized from an ethics perspective. And there are already well-established processes and structures and standards and protocols to scrutinize intent. You don't need to kind of get distracted by a new AI ethics committee. The second question you need to ask yourself is, are my algorithms explainable? Again, really the only difference between AI and software is AI tends to be opaque in terms of how it makes its decisions. If you can make it explainable, many of the issues around governance go away. They become transparent, auditable, governable. And again, they tick a lot of the boxes from the AI EU Act. The final question you need to ask yourself is a strange one, which is not what happens if my AI goes wrong. As engineers, we identify failure points and we try to mitigate those risks. You now need to ask yourself, what happens if my AI goes very right? For the first time ever, your AI can overachieve its goal and it can actually cause harm elsewhere in the supply chain. And I guess from a regulatory perspective, I think that what we want to do is make sure that we don't deploy a really clever, smart AI that massively overachieves its goal that causes harm to humanity. That is one of the risks I think we need to look at from a regulatory perspective. So I call those micro risks. There are malicious risks, which are preventing, again, bad actors from creating pathogens and misinformation. Again, that's the role of the government. I think that we need to figure out how do we mitigate those issues. And then there's a set of macro risks that I think that it's within all of our collective to lean into. Now, I used, people might be familiar with the PEST framework. PEST is political, economic, social, technological. These are macro words. It got extended to pestle and it got extended again to steeple. And I actually think there are a steeple of macro challenges that we need to face as a species. And I think that that's a collective problem that we need to solve both as enterprise and also government.
Steeple, because I used to work for a research firm, and we used to use the STEEP approach, and that was social, technological, I'm trying to remember, it was the E before the I, economic, industry, and policy. So what's the LE?
So actually, the steeple one that I use doesn't actually have an I. So it's C is social, the social, which is, I would argue, the point in time where we cure death. Nobody knows what's going to happen once we realize there are people amongst us that don't have the I. The T is a technological, which is the point in time where we build a machine that's a million times smarter than us. And we need to think about the consequences of that. One of the E's is the ethical, and I would argue that's a point in time where we build machines that are conscious. The other E is the environmental, which is the point in time where we either gain or lose control of our ecosystem. The P is the political one, which is, I would argue, where we either create a post-truth world or a world where we know that all information that we're engaging with is authenticated. The L is the legal singularity, which is around surveillance and the ubiquity of surveillance. And the final E is the economic singularity, which is actually coined by a very good friend of mine, which is the point in time where we automate the majority of human labor. So I think all of those big questions we need to be leaning into as a species.
And they probably point very clearly to the various facets required to create a protopia, I should imagine, as well.
That's right. I think, they're often referred to as singularities, and a singularity comes from physics, a point in time that you can't see beyond. And it was adopted by the AI community to refer to the technological singularity, which is the point in time where we build a machine that's a super intelligence. And again, nobody knows what happens beyond that point. I think we can speculate, and the point of a singularity is that it's still within our gift to steer humanity towards a positive outcome. I think there is a future world where it's not a post-truth world; it's a world where we know and authenticate all content. I think there's a future world where we get control of our ecosystem as opposed to lose control of our ecosystem. It's within the gift of all of us to create that future.
Absolutely, and I for one, I'm a true believer that AI can help us, definitely help us get there. But coming back to 2025, B2C world generally has become a bit of a proving ground for many AI experiments. So what learnings can industries take from these early phases?
Historically, what I've been interested in is identifying frictions across supply chains, primarily in retail, actually, and then building innovations using AI that disrupt or differentiate those organizations. So let me give you an example. We built 12, 13 years ago now Tesco's last mile delivery solution. And I think by improving the algorithms that optimize those vehicles, you can have a material impact on carbon reduction. So we're currently, I think, saving Tesco's like 20 million miles a year in reduction of travel time, which is to the moon and back 50 times. We've just, over the past several years, solved their middle mile problem. And from what I understand, that's resulting in a reduction of carbon equivalent to 3 long-haul flights a day. And so the point here is that if you use AI to solve problems across your supply chain, you can have a massive carbon impact and also make those goods, again, more accessible to more people. One of the real opportunities of AI is then to stitch those different solutions together to create end-to-end digital twins of supply chains. So let's be honest, if I go to a retailer right now and say, I'm going to run a marketing campaign that's going to increase demand by 10% of some of your products, can you tell me, will your suppliers default on their supply? Do you have enough distribution drivers? Do you have enough space in your warehouse? Do you have enough people in your stores to fulfill that promise to the customer? Most organizations can't project those questions across their supply chain. So it's actually very hard for them to know whether they're going to meet their KPIs or not, whether they be sustainability goals or customer satisfaction or whatever. The promise of AI is to create those connected digital twins to be able to run scenarios and make sure that you're fulfilling that promise to the customer and the promise to your customer, your company values.
Brilliant. And we're running short of time, but just bringing us back to what's keeping you busy in terms of Consium, I was really pleased to hear a bit about your agent verification capability that you're developing. And we did just want touch very briefly on risk and resilience and regulation. And it sounds like that's where you've ended up focusing with Consium. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, Consume is at its heart an AI safety company, and actually, so we want to make sure that AIs are safe for human beings, which is verifying them. But actually, we also want to make sure that we're being safe for AIs. There is a future where agents become embodied. We put them in robots, and there's a future where those brains are much more biologically orientated. I won't bore you with it, but there's a topic called neuromorphics, which is a new sort of new emerging category from academia, which is how biological brains work and how we can translate those innovations into AIs, making them much more adaptive, much more energy efficient. And there is a future where we might end up accidentally spawning sentience machines that can feel, and we need to mitigate that risk so we don't cause mass suffering. So now I would argue we actually have a duty of care not only to human beings and animals, we now have a duty of care to AI. So yeah, Consium's primarily goal is to make sure that AI is safe for humans and also it's safe for AIs.
Fantastic. I could talk to you so much longer, but it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, Daniel. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Thanks for joining me for the Promethean's first podcast. I hope you enjoyed my discussion with Dr. Daniel Hulme as much as I did. It highlights just how much the advent of the fourth industrial revolution requires us to move beyond academic theory and concepts to understanding the impact of AI on our lives and the world we inhabit. Our conversation was the perfect starting point for the Promethean in its quest to become the definitive interlocutor between those who fund, develop and govern AI and those who consume, live with and work with it. However, I couldn't hope to achieve such truly lofty ambitions on my own. So I'd like to thank the Promethean team, in particular Devonte Andrew, Dean Arnett, Catherine Bestel, Mikey Prest and Rory Seaford. Please share your feedback and questions with us. Let us know what you think we should investigate. You can also like, share, follow and comment on this episode on all of your favourite social media platforms or visit the site thepromethean.com. When you do, you can also tune into our next podcast where I'll be in conversation with Dr. Jennifer Prenke, a quantum physicist and former head of AI data at Google DeepMind, where we'll be exploring how data efficiency, quantum computing and responsible AI can shape innovation, information democratization and human agency in the age of large foundation learning models. So thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you soon.